Ventriloquist Jay Johnson became a household name starring on the sitcom Soap as ventriloquist Chuck Campbell and his puppet Bob. He later went on to win a Tony Award for his Broadway show, The Two and Only. I talked to Jay Johnson about his incredible career on this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that talks to puppeteers about the art and business of puppetry. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Well, Jay Johnson, thank you so much for coming on Under the Puppet.
Well, my pleasure. Nice to be under the puppet with all you puppeteers.
Yes, although you're usually next to the puppet. You're not oftentimes under it.
Yeah, I think of ventriloquism sometimes as open stage puppetry. You know, we're puppeteer scene. So there it is.
Yeah. Do you remember your first exposure to puppetry as a kid?
Probably. It was Big John and Sparky. I don't know if that means anything. It was a 50s radio show, and it was actually a guy named John. Well, I can't remember his last name at this moment. But anyway, Big John and he recorded his voice and then sped it up like Alvin and the Chipmunk way back when. That was so unique back then. And it was a little character named Sparky. Well, they got so popular that they toured this kind of radio show, and the way they presented Sparky on stage was a fairly large-sized string puppet. So I had kind of listened to Sparky so much and to see him on stage, and I was young, so 5 years old or so, and wasn't really sure what that was, how he taught. I mean, totally bought into it. It was just a wonderful experience. So that was the first one I can recall. And then I'm sure when I found out that somebody was actually manipulating that's got my interest. And so anytime I could figure that out or see somebody perform or learn more about it, I would try to do it.
And were your parents creative when you were growing up?
My mother, extremely creative, particularly with a sewing machine. And so early puppets were generally made by her on her machine for me. And Dad was an educator and a businessman. And it was that, he provides the time of your mother so your mother can teach you all the things. So I was real lucky to have a real strong business father and a real imaginative mother. So got it from both sides.
Excellent. And on your website, it says that you discovered your knack for puppetry when you saw your cousin's Jerry Mahoney doll when you were 11.
Yes, absolutely. I talk about this in my one-man show, that buying a doll for a kid from Texas was really not something he wanted to do back when I was growing up. And Jerry Mahoney was a doll. I mean, there was no question about it. That was a doll. I saw it as a puppet, as an instrument, but my parents certainly didn't see it that way. But because we didn't have the money to do that, and Mom was making me puppets anyway. But my cousin, who's their family was a little better off than us, she had one. She had one of the early Giro non-moving eyes, Jerry Mahoney, and I just bonded with it immediately on a trip to her house one day, and they finally had to give it to me to get me to go home. So.
And did you, learning the art of ventriloquism, did you look in books, or did it just come naturally to you?
Well, it really came naturally to me, and I even before this connection to the Giro Jerry Mahoney, I would play. I had a real strong imagination, I think, because I'm a dyslexic to, if 1 out of 10, I'm probably a 7, so I'm not debilitated by it, but it certainly impacts my learning. So I was not a big reader and I was not a big thinker, but my imagination was really, really strong. And they tell me that at 5 years old, I would talk to a telephone that was disconnected, and the telephone would talk back. They would hear a voice back on the thing. And in my mind, that was just the way you played telephone. And so I guess I had just sort of a natural instinct for ventriloquism. And then when you discover you have that, that's all you want to do. You want to rehearse and rehearse and rehearse.
Shortly after that, getting that Jerry Mahoney doll and your cousin letting you borrow it for a while, you started doing gigs right away, right, at a young age?
Yeah, I did. I was sort of the Darcy Lynn of my time. I think I was 11 or 12. And my father, being a big businessman, was president of the Lions Club, and he was part of the Rotary Club, and so civic clubs. I was made all the rounds of all the Lions clubs there almost immediately. So, and as best I remember, it was a little bit of an Alvin and the Chipmunks kind of approach to, and I even called him Squeaky back then, my character. And it was by that time I had wrangled a moving eye Jerry Mahoney, so I thought I was really stepping out. But yeah, it was a novelty, and I took to it. I was very shy, but on stage I was not. So, I enjoyed doing it, and immediately had opportunities. And I, unlike a lot of actor friends of mine, I've never really worked as a waiter or a cab driver or anything. I've always been able to support myself with what I love to do.
And it's just, it's so great that your dad is like, he's a talent. I'm going to book him places. That's just a great thing to have that support.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And my dad, everything was a learning experience for Dad. And one of the best things he did for me, and at the time, I might have rebelled, but it was, I saw the usefulness of this thought anyway. But when I finally got to college, there was some question as to whether college would do me any good or not. Would I use that? Dad insisted everybody needed a college degree. So I had a scholarship in the drama department at the University of Texas, just because, they didn't have ventriloquism. So that's where they would put me with what I did. And Dad said, well, yeah, you can do that. You can go down and major in drama at the University of Texas, or you can get another degree that's totally different from that, because you're going to learn what they're going to teach you on your feet. You're going to learn that on stage. You're going to be there. So you ought to learn something else that would be complementary, but it would be different. And he suggested I learn marketing and get a business degree. So I did. And it was the same degree he had, and my brother had, and my sister had, and it was the family degree, marketing BBA. And so I probably used that as much as ventriloquism, because the first thing they do is hand you a contract when you start working.
Right.
And if you've never seen a contract, don't know what that is, or don't know how to treat yourself as a product and what you do as a product, then I don't know what you do. So it really has served me well, that my dad's advice. And he's right. I learned everything that I might have been taught, except maybe some drama history that I wouldn't use anyway. But yeah. So yeah, I really got the business side of show business and the show side of show business well ingrained.
That's amazing. I do want to back up a little bit to high school, because I read this on your site too, that in high school you produced and starred in your own local television show. How did that come about?
Well, that was amazing. I finally had to either I was going to flunk out of high school, or I was going to have a hit show. I couldn't have both. And we finally discontinued it. But I was hired to do a local car dealership. It was called Sunshine Rambler, and that's been when American Motors was suddenly come out with Ramblers, and they were doing a lot of ads. And the guy had copy that was written for a disc jockey, and he said, "Wow, this would be even better if you did it with a puppet." And then so instead of the $50 that a DJ would have gotten, I got $75 to do a commercial, and then we did maybe 10 or 20 of those commercials. And finally, the guy said, this would be fun. Why don't we just do a Saturday morning thing, and you do lead-ins to Jungle Jim, which was a kind of a 30-minute black and white Johnny Weissmuller thing back then. So that's how it happened. I was really just working for the car dealership and doing their advertising, and it turned into a show. And it just couldn't keep it up. I mean, it was a weekly show on Saturday, but it took much more time than I thought it would.
Do copies of the show still exist anywhere, or at least your pieces on it?
I don't think anybody. I don't think they even kept them. It might have just been live, and they must have taped them. But if it was probably 18-inch tape, and you would have to create a machine to play them even if they survived. But yeah, I have the feeling that they were used. That tape was used as a newsreel almost the day it aired. I'm pretty sure.
Did working on that show teach you any lessons that you would use later in your life when you were on soap or on TV?
Well, you must have. I mean, first of all, what you learn really fast is, and because I was so young and surrounded by technicians and cameramen and lighting people and everything, you learn really quick that you be very quiet and you learn from them. You don't, you don't have an opinion until it comes to your stuff and your comedy and all that stuff that I could have input on. But just to sit back and watch. And the one thing I learned maybe from that day was the power of learning someone's name, particularly on a movie set or a television set. There are so many people. They're doing so many different jobs. You interact with them very intensely, and then you might not see them for a while. And particularly when I got into producing later, when I got up to Los Angeles, you can walk into a set and you can say, I need that light fixed. I want that light fixed. And they'll go, yeah, okay. Get that guy the guy, well, you've already wasted a bunch of time. But if you know that the lighting director's name is James, you say, can you get James to fix that light? It's very efficient. And you've not wasted a lot of time trying to find somebody, So I did learn that if you learn somebody's name really quickly and hold on to that it becomes a really great tool, And still to this day, I try to advise people all the time: learn names and get to know people. And nobody's just a job, Everybody's a person doing a job. So.
Well, and especially in a field like ventriloquism or general puppetry or whatever, you get to know that person. They may be working on another job, and that other job goes, hey, we need a puppeteer. We need a ventriloquist. And they go, I know just the person. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it just doesn't hurt to make friends. I just don't understand. I was never raised that way, particularly professionally. When I started really working was in high school when I think it was my senior year. I got hired at Six Flags over Texas, which was right in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And normally they used college-age talent, but I sneaked in a couple of years earlier than the average age. And I worked for a man named Charles R. Meeker Jr. Still have his picture right here on my wall. And he was really a tough boss, very dominant figure. A really great spokesman, a really great lecturer. He just was amazing. And his rule was there is no such thing as a prima donna. And the minute you showed any sort of attitude that because you could sing, dance, or do ventriloquism, you were any way different, better, or not anything but the same as the ride operator that does the sky ride, he wouldn't have it. So early on, I learned that that's just going to get in the way if you have attitude and try to be better than somebody or try to whatever. And that really was Mr. Meeker. I'm glad he was as tough as he was on us.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought up Six Flags, because I did want to talk about doing the shows at theme parks. And on your website, it says that the summer you graduated, you did 918 shows at Six Flags over Georgia. What did performing so many shows, especially in a row like that, teach you about performing live in front of an audience?
Well, you learn all kinds of things. I don't know that I could, distill it down to one particular thing, but the main thing you learn really quickly is that you either decide that you like doing that or you don't like doing that,
right?
Because that's all you're doing.
Right.
What had happened was normally the schedule was they had two casts of performers, and one cast would do 5 shows, one on the hour every hour, and then the second cast would come in to do the same thing, 5 shows every hour. And somebody quit or got fired from the other show, and they asked me if I wanted to do both shows because I had 2 different characters. I could do one character in one show and the other character in the other show. And that meant I would do 10 shows a day with no day off. To give one of the casts a day off, then one day a week, one of the casts would do 8 shows. So they wouldn't do the first one, do the last one. They would just do 8. So it was a little easier day, but so for me, it was 10 shows, 10 shows, 10 shows, 8 shows, 8 shows, 10 shows, 10 shows, 10 shows, 8 shows. It was just constant. But the other thing, you learn to like it. I look forward to it. The other thing is to keep it fresh because, there would be times if you didn't really put your head in the game, you've just done that joke or that routine or that movement or that dance or that song 30 minutes before that. And you've suddenly, if you don't get the laugh that you might have gotten normally, you think, did I just repeat that joke? Did I just do that joke twice? And that would happen all the time. And you had to really keep your mind on it to know that, no, it was just the difference in an audience. And here's how you keep it fresh and all those things. So, yeah, it was an amazing experience, just amazing.
There's still sort of a sprinkling of puppetry jobs at theme parks these days. Do you recommend that like young puppeteers seek out those jobs, or is that a good starting place?
I'm of the belief that you learn to work by working, and you take every job that you can that will help you get to the next job, and it's going to be work. Everybody wants the happy part of show business. Everybody wants that great part where, look, I just got a standing ovation. I feel great. But if you think about the time you spend on stage compared to the time you're preparing to get on stage, your career is really rehearsing. Your career is not walking on stage. You've prepared, 10 hours for every minute that you walk on that stage. So you really better learn to like that. So I think theme parks are a great way to get it. You do it a lot on schedule. You do it like a producer wants to. You just learn all the grinding parts of show business, I think, and it's fun. I mean, everybody likes to work at theme parks. I think I did. There was my first summer at Six Flags. It was that situation. It was an amphitheater, and we just did 2 and 3 shows a night. And you just made me remember that at the time later enclosed it, but this time it was an amphitheater. So at night it would light up, and the sky ride, the little kind of gondola cars that go by, would go right across the audience of our show. And occasionally you would have a sky by heckler, who would yell down and and there's no way to combat that, because by the time you would do a heckler stopper, he's already at the next section of the park. So
right.
And then weather, you would go out and occasionally it would be cool enough in the evening that you would kind of see your breath. And so I had Squeaky at the time, and I would talk, and I would have my breath showing, and then Squeaky would talk, and my breath would show. Another handicap to try to overcome.
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk about in college you met your mentor, Arthur Sieving, and I would love to know a little bit about who he was and how you came to meet him.
Well, it was just serendipitous how I met Art Sieving. After that 918 show summer, I was still performing with a kind of tricked out Jerry Mahoney puppet. I also had a Frank Marshall puppet, but Squeaky was really just this toy puppet. And I realized that you can't, that puppet was never made to do 1,000 shows, so I needed a professional puppet carved, and no internet at the time. Where do you go? And you ask people, and eventually I got a copy of a magazine at the time called The Oracle that had been sent to me by somebody. And at the back was a list of all the puppet makers at the time. Maybe there were 10, I don't know. And so I just started going down the page, writing them and asking for a catalog or pictures or whatever. And I just couldn't find one that really turned me on until I got to the S's, and his name was Arthur Sieving. So, and I couldn't send off. There was no address. It was just a phone number. So I called him up, and that's when our relationship started. And he was just the right guy for me at the right time. He sent me puppets, pictures of puppets that he had carved. Didn't carve a lot of them. He just mainly for his own use, but they were just beautiful. I fell in love with them and him. And while he was carving Squeaky, he wrote me letters on what he was doing and how he was doing. And I look back at those letters and realize he really was mentoring me in a way that was subtle enough and wonderful enough that I didn't even see it coming. And then eventually I got to spend some time with him, but really just about a day. And then we continued to write back and forth and call. And he was just a brilliant man. And I think most of the things or most of the traditions I know about ventriloquism and vent puppets comes from him and what he did, you know.
Yeah.
So he was just a great guy. He was an artist, and he was a ventriloquist. And in his later years, he became a dioramist, which, you know, those little miniature wonderlands that they do for museums and things.
Right.
And he lived in Springfield, Illinois, and so he did a whole miniature life of Lincoln. And I remember the day I saw him, he was just putting that installation in, and we spent a lot of time looking at little tiny Lincolns and little tiny stove hats, you know, and it's great stuff.
Do you think that it's important or it's a benefit to performers to find a mentor or somebody that you can ask questions and kind of study under?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's I think that's true of any art. You know, anybody, any place, anytime you want to learn something about anything, you need to find somebody that you admire and you respect doing that. And if nothing else, even if they tell you nothing, just observe them and watch what they're doing and see how they get it done. And if they will take you under their wing and just give you those inside tips, you know, what could be better than that? That's a personal teacher. That's what we all live for, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's rare to find somebody like that. It's also not unusual. You can find mentors that teach you maybe things that you learn by the opposite way. You know, I'm not going to do that way. I could see didn't work for him, so I'm not going to do it to her or whatever. But yeah, I think it's really important. I think that everybody should be an apprentice for somebody, you know, and learn from a master. And because nothing, you know, Grant, one of the things that gets me as I get older, and I guess we've always been this way, is that people are so quick to want reward, but not willing to put in the time to get it. You know, people say, wow, I would love to be a ventriloquist, or I would love to play the piano. Well, you had as much time, or I had as much time as anybody. And all it was time that I invested. I enjoyed doing it. So it's not, you're born with the talent, and the talent really is the stick-to-itiveness and the desire to continue, you know, that find fun in things that are maybe repetitious or maybe not what somebody else would do. But yeah, I mean, you just, now I've forgotten there was a mentor question, I think, but you just need to have that practice. You need to have a place to be, try things out, you know. Nobody's going to be perfect the first time.
Right.
But I think, that's what it was. Everybody just wants it immediately. They just want to do it immediately. And what I see online all the time, particularly in days when we've been shut in, the internet is a great thing because you can find all these wonderful things and wonderful performances. But the downside is it also has a camera. And so I see so many people recording a routine and just putting it out there. And that's fine, but that's rehearsal. That's rehearsal. You're the only one that's going to benefit from that until you get it to a point where that's going to kill every time. And to me, it just kind of demeans the art. I would love to see your house after it's finished. I don't want to come over and watch you put in your bathroom, and I don't want to watch you do the plumbing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So we just want to rush right away. I just want to rush right away and be on television. I just want to get that part. That's just that's the wrong way to approach it. You know, you just have to put in your time.
Right. Well, after college, did you just keep honing your act and performing different places?
Yes. Actually, Six Flags was a very good career for me because it worked well with my college. That was a summer job. So there was Six Flags over Texas, and then I moved Six Flags over Georgia. And then they started mass producing theme parks, Astroworld, and then Six Flags Mid-America. And the only theme park I wanted to work and didn't get to was Disneyland. That was always like that was the penultimate.
Right, right.
But I did that in the summer, and then this Mr. Meeker, who produced those shows, eventually had a little nightclub. So after college, for about a year, I was. It was sort of a dinner theater, but it was a variety show, and my wife and I both did it. And then a manager from Los Angeles came to see that show, and that's how I got hooked up and headed to L.A. But yeah, I mean, gig working is just gig working. You just work whenever you can. And an odd thing, talking about mentors, my mind is kind of jumping back. Early in my life, maybe I was 11 or 12, I met a ventriloquist that was coming through Lubbock, Texas, doing a kind of a home show, at the convention center. And he was a really nice man, and he had an Insel figure, a Davenport figure. He was real nice to let me look at it and see what it was. And as a matter of fact, he's the one that eventually sent me the Oracle, where I found all the carvers. Mm-hmm. And his name was Ted Knight. Later went on to star in the Mary Tyler Moore Show. But at the time, he was just a ventriloquist, tried to do his gig work. And what he said to me at the time, he said, do as many shows for as many people as many times in any situation that you can do it. And absolutely, wherever you can. They're not always going to be the best things. We always have done our shows that we could have done better, or the circumstances weren't the best, but you learn from that one. You learn from every show you do. And he was didn't see much after that. I ran into him out in Los Angeles a couple of times when he was a big star, and he was a real nice man. But that advice I kept with me all these years.
Yeah. What was it after meeting this manager that made you decide to move to LA to pursue this further?
Well, he was a television manager. He had managed Andy Griffith and all that, Ken Berry and Gomer Pyle, all that stable of people, and he really knew television and sitcoms really well. And that's really what I wanted to do. I really wanted to get out and get into a sitcom of some kind. I had no idea at the time that Susan Harris would write a ventriloquist into a show called Soap. I was just any part, I'd take any part. So yeah, when he said, if you ever wanted to come to Los Angeles, I think I could help you. That's all it was. My wife had lived out here for a while in Los Angeles, and she had worked at Disneyland. She was in the Crazy Horse Review, or the Golden Horseshoe Review.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was just, out of college, done everything in Texas that I thought needed to be done. And here we come to LA, and I think within 6 months, Sandy was dancing on the Carol Burnett show. So we had some income coming in. The manager put me at a place called The Horn, which was like the Comedy Store, only it had more singers than comics. And I was there for a couple of years, and that's where, eventually Soap comes along, and I get to audition, and everything happens the way it should in hindsight, so.
Yeah.
We're here to start the show. I'm Chuck. I'm Don. Hello. Let's go. I'll sing and dance. He'll dance and sing. Wherever we go, whatever we do, we're gonna go through it together. Yeah.
The audition for Soap, it was just a kind of a general casting call, right?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I saw the ad, and I didn't pay much attention to it because at that moment in my life, I was just about to start as the spokesman / commercial guy, which is what I'd done, back in high school. I'd been the commercial guy for a dairy company in Boston. And they were coming out with something called frozen yogurt, which nobody had ever heard of before. And they were calling it Frogurt. And this was going to be the hottest thing in the world. And I was going to be their spokesman. And I had created a puppet for them that was the Farmer Frogurt. And really, I had signed a contract that said they had me. And so it really wasn't going to do me the good to audition for a television show. But it did. And they seemed to like me, and it seemed to continue forward. So I finally went to the company, and I said, look, here's the deal. Yes, you have me. And you can tell me not to do the show. But if this show runs 4 or 5 times and I'm seen on the show, then I'd be much more valuable to you then than I am now. So why don't you just let me try and do the show for as long as it lasts? And of course, it lasted 4 years. And after about 6 months, they said, frozen yogurt is not the hot ticket we thought it was. So they reduced me from my contract. So yeah, it was just be in the right place at the right time, having the right look. I looked like Richard Mulligan's son, just body type. I had done enough acting to know, how to hit a mark and how to learn a line. And I was a ventriloquist, and that's what they were looking for. So a lot of people, and growing up in Texas, a lot of people would say, well, look, I don't need to live in Los Angeles because, I'll just get the trades. And when there's an audition, I'll just fly out and I'll do the audition. If I get the show, that's great. And that never works because it's less than 24 hours before something can happen, By the time you hear about it, it's probably already cast, and you're going to hear about it before it hits the trades if you're around. So you just have to be here and be at the right place at the right time. And back then, that was it for me. So
I think a little bit of it goes back to, too, what we were talking about is the whole networking thing, too. It's like you can live in Texas and just fly out here, but you're not going to meet anybody, when you do that.
Exactly. And one of the things I learned really quickly when I got out, and I tell people all the time that are moving out here, a casting person has to see you 4 or maybe 5 times before you even register on the retina, because they see so many people one time. Person comes out, doesn't get that audition. Well, I'm going to go back and be a dentist or do whatever you're going to do. But if a casting director's seen you 3 or 4 times, then by the time they know your face and kind of what you've done before, now they start thinking, what, that guy would be good for this part that I've got coming up, or this girl would be perfect for, I just read the script for, So to put it all together, see, really, that is the network. You have to be there. You have to say, I'm serious about this. You have to say, I'll be here when you call me. I won't have to fly in. So, yeah, very important.
Well, and you got the part on Soap, but Squeaky did not. Why didn't Why didn't the network like Squeaky?
Well, it was less the network and more the producers of Soap. The character of Chuck in the Bible of the show had been living in Hawaii with his mother and Bert's first wife. So somehow in their mind, they thought the puppet should look a little Hawaiian. It should be a little Hawaiian boy.
Yeah.
So Squeaky was definitely not that. So they got a character that Renee Zendaya made. Jack Shafton kind of messed around with it, and they put a curly wig on it and darkened the features. And I thought he looked very black when I showed up. I thought he was like a black figure. And slowly that plot of being from Hawaii I was in a Hawaiian shirt for the first 8 episodes, I guess, me and Bob. But then pretty soon that kind of went away. And so we lightened his complexion a little bit and kind of combed his hair a little bit. So he became less and less Hawaiian. But I think it was more the look. Squeaky was too sweet and looking, and Bob was going to be this acerbic kind of nasty character. So yeah, they definitely had what they wanted in mind.
And I've heard in interviews you say that Chuck and Bob's popularity on the show changed what sort of the writers had planned for the end of that first season.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In the original Bible, the cliffhanger for the first year was who killed Peter Campbell. That was a stepbrother. No, that was my real brother, I think, on the show. And there were all these people that could have had a reason to kill Peter. But in the Bible, it was his brother, Chuck, who killed Peter. And there was a scene where they get Chuck and Bob on the stand at the courtroom, and Bob, turns Chuck in for a deal with the DA, and Chuck goes to jail, and Bob is set free. I don't really remember, but yeah, the character was in for 8 shows and then to be written out as the murderer. And back up one more step. That is the reason that happened was that Susan Harris, when she was creating Soap, the big book at the time, and they made a movie about a year later called Magic, and it was about a ventriloquist who was a killer. So she kind of wrote that into the Bible, and so yeah, Chuck stayed, but they found a voice for Chuck and Bob that kind of balanced out the voice that Benson had at the other side of the plot. The Tate household had Benson, the Campbell household had Bob. They could make fun of the characters, and yeah, so we stayed for the rest of the time, and then they had to figure out who killed Peter Campbell. It wasn't that.
Well, I think that's good. It broke the stereotype of murderous ventriloquists, at least on that show.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we've had enough of those, and I'm sure there'll be plenty more. But yeah, but I did reinforce the stereotype that we're all crazy. Maybe we're not all murderers, but we are all crazy, I guess.
Well, I think all performers are a little crazy, so we're all like that.
I think you have to be. I think that a lot of people think imagination is crazy, so I'd rather have that than not be imaginative.
Yeah. Well, after Soap was over, you continued to make appearances with Bob, and you still do today. Was there any sort of rights thing with the network, or was it just assumed that Bob was yours after the show was over?
Well, that's a great question, and I've never been asked specifically, but the truth of the matter is that I kept trying to, being the business guy, and particularly at that time, I knew all the copyright laws about what it took to copyright and what would be copyright infringement. And I kept saying, you really have to protect this space if that's what you want to do. You really need to do that. And if you're going to put it on a lunchbox, you really need to protect it. Because the provenance was not clear of who actually created the original Bob. So I kept trying to tell them, and they were kind of saying, "Well, you don't worry about that, Jay. You just do your thing, and you just don't worry about that." So when it became clear that the public was not really into seeing Squeaky, they wanted to see Bob. Although the characters were very similar,
Mm-hmm.
It was just the look thing. So I started performing with Bob. I had went back to the guys who built Bob and got them to build the outside, and I got some Disney Imagineers to do the inside. So I built the puppet that I wanted, and started performing with him as Bob. And I had them make the appropriate changes to this Bob that would make him look like the Bob, but there'd be enough differences that I could claim not a copyright infringement.
Right.
You can't copyright the name Bob.
Right.
They could copyright the name Bob Campbell. So I never referred to him maybe once as Bob Campbell, but he's really just Bob. And then at the end of the show, no one ever said, where's Bob? And I just left with him, No one ever asked. No one ever asked. After the first day, when I would take him home, he wasn't a prop. He was my stuff. So that original Bob is now in the Smithsonian. So there you go.
Right. I was going to ask about that. That's pretty amazing that Bob is in the popular culture collection.
I know. It really kind of shocked me too. And what shocked me even more was the level at which, you would think that somebody could just send something to the Smithsonian and they would go, "Oh, fantastic. It's, that's John Wayne's hat. Fabulous. We want it." But there's a huge level of checking it out, and there has to be a committee, and there has to be interviews, and they have to check it out. And do you have proper credentials? Is this the right thing? And so it really took a few months when I said, I've got this original one, and I never plan to use it again because it's not the one that I like to work with. It's got a whole different history behind it, and so they saw it as pop culture too, and my kids had to sign off. That was another thing. They had to sign off that they would never come back and say, "Oh, no, we wanted that Bob." So yeah, it's quite a process.
Yeah. Well, after Soap, you started performing in comedy clubs, and it was kind of that thing you were talking about of, hey, if I'm on this show, I'm going to be more recognizable. And did you find that transition to doing comedy shows just really easy to make?
For me, it was because at the time there was a pecking order. You started out as an opening comic or an MC, and then you got to be the middle guy. And then if you got enough material and you could perform better than the closer, then you got to be the closing guy. And I just walked into a comedy club as the closer because, they knew who I was. And so it was really successful and had a great time. And there was a time when every major town had 2, maybe 3 comedy clubs. So, the working was pretty easy and always available. And then I think I saw it coming when it was, I was in a club in Georgia. I think maybe it was Funny Bone. I'm not even sure. But there was a Spotlight magazine. I think Spotlight was the magazine that all the clubs had on all the tables, and it had, interviews from people. And there was an ad in it from HBO that said, "Why risk a DUI? watch your comedy on television. And I said to myself, I would, if I were a club owner, I would never allow this ad in my club, because what they're saying is, don't come here anymore. You can see this guy tomorrow on this special. And then they upped or lowered the legal alcohol limit. And so a lot of things just, you couldn't do a 2-drink minimum anymore. You couldn't make any money at this. And so the whole system kind of turned around. And now, there's maybe 1 or 2 that are still around that are good and thriving. I loved my comedy club days. It was terrific. Had about an hour and 10 minutes that I could do, and loved to ad lib with the crowd, loved to mess with them, loved to find out something about the town and put that in the show. And yeah, it was rock and roll.
You also at that time started doing corporate gigs as well, right?
Yeah, and that's really what I was probably most qualified to do, I think, because of my business background and marketing. I really did speak their language, so I could write stuff for them. I could write particular material for this particular company, knowing what there was, and I could, it was just natural for me. And that was a great gig. I think I probably made more money doing that than I made at any other venue or any other job type, just because it was just the thing to do until about 2008 when, everything crumbled, because I think it was the president at the time said, "Why are all these companies having these big business meetings in Las Vegas?" And I said to myself again, there's the magazine with the ad in it saying, "Why do you want to have this thing there?" So, yeah. So, corporate's still around. They're just not the depth that used to. I mean, they still want to hire Jay Leno at $400,000 for a night, but the medium and lower budget than that, and the smaller meetings that all of us were doing just don't exist anymore. They're saving up for the big ones. So,
yeah.
Don't know if that will change. Don't know if that'll come back. I do think, and I've always thought this, that someday, most of the time I go to the corporate gigs and there'll be a huge audience, the whole company in some big arena, and they would put an iMag and they put me up on the television, and I could reach all the people. And I thought, nobody's looking at the stage. Everybody's looking at this television. I could be at home. If I had a studio at home, I could just link it in and they would never know, So I think we're very close to being able to do that now, with all the Zooms and all the things we have in the world. But don't know if that's the business model. So they don't have to travel. They don't have to do anything. They just have to link in at the right time, and I'll entertain them.
Yeah. Did you like traveling when you were traveling around doing clubs and stuff?
Yeah, I'm not a really great traveler. I really don't enjoy the travel aspect of it. And at the time when I was traveling with so much stuff, it was really more of the logistics of getting everything to arrive at the same time at the same place with me in time for the show.
Right. And
that stress was just, I carried everything on with me that could possibly break or would be irreplaceable, like, Bob's head and all the other heads. But you couldn't do a show if the wardrobe didn't arrive, and all the things. So it was just a constant worry. And then, as TSA came into our lives, then it got harder. And now what you carry on is harder. And I remember the day that you could look at a sky cap and say, "Here's $50. Can you get these pieces on that?" "Yes, sir." And they never weighed them, never did anything. But all of that's changed now. So, yeah, I used to tell people all the time, you pay me not for the show. I do the show because I like to do the show. You pay me to get there. You pay me to travel. You pay me for this time of not great comfort for me. So that's what you're getting for your dollar.
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk about The Two and Only, which is your Tony Award-winning Broadway show. Where did the idea for that show come from?
Well, I had always wanted to do a theatrical show. I always, I loved television. I loved corporates. I loved this stuff. But a theater is that's the church. That's where the arts should be. And ventriloquism and puppetry too, I think are particularly live events. They're much more enjoyable when you see them happening of the moment than recorded or on television or something. So I always wanted to do it. And people would come up and say, well, you ought to do a one-man show. And I said, yeah, I've always wanted to do that. And that was always in the back of my mind. Finally, two friends came up and said, you ought to do a one-man show. And I laughed and I said, I've been told that for a lot, and yes, I should. And they said, well, maybe we could help you. And I kind of laughed again, and I said, I appreciate it, and I love you guys. I've heard that so many times that's terrific. So they meant it. It was Paul Kreppel and Murphy Cross, two talented actors, directors, and wonderful people. And they didn't let it drop. They, once a week they would come by and say, okay, tell us more stories, do more of this, let's do this, let's do this. And I kept saying, yeah, but where's the show? And they said, I think the show is right here. I think what this is the show, and it'll tell us. And I don't make the story longer than the run of the Broadway show, but that the fact is that we kept talking. I kept introducing the characters, kept telling stories and everything. And Murphy kept writing notes, and we kept laying them out on a rehearsal floor. And she called one day and she said, okay, we've got all of this stuff. What will it take to get it on a stage? And I jokingly said, knowing me and my deadline attitude, somebody's going to have to call and say, we have a theater next week and you open on Tuesday. She went, oh, okay. So indeed, she called back in around an hour. She said, well, it's 2 weeks from now, but we do have the theater and you open on a Tuesday.
Wow.
I was going on absolutely called the bluff. And so I said, okay. And partly I just didn't want to let them down. Secondly, I said, wow, I've never gotten to this stage before. I happened to be on a cruise, and I remember the ship. It was the Navigator, Royal Caribbean. And it's got a nice little balcony on the entertainer suite there that's kind of hidden in a way at the back. And I sat on the balcony after having those dreams that, you wake up on a stage with no lines. And I just said, okay, what's this going to be? And I had all the notes that Murphy had taken. And really more out of, oh my God, I've got to do something to put on a stage. Right there it was. The show was right there in the cards, just like they had said. And it was like, wait, this story matches this story. And that character really kind of fits in. This is kind of a section. Well, that's kind of an act. That's kind of a break. That's kind of a storyline. This is it. And by the time I got off the ship, we had pretty much the show. We rehearsed it and toured it for 6 months or so, but it was pretty much there.
Yeah.
So panic.
The panic is the key to getting it done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You got to have. It's like if you have all the time in the world, you don't have any time. You don't have any time
Right.
if you have all the time in the world. If you've got 2 weeks to do it, you'll get it done. If you have 1 week, you'll get it done in a week. But it has to mean something to you. You're exactly right. Panic.
Yeah.
Am I going to throw my voice tonight? Are you hard of hearing? No. Why? It's just, yes, when? What do you mean when? When are you going to work? When are you going to throw your voice? When are you going to do your job, Jay? I just did. When? Right then. Where? Right there. Did it now? Right then. Did it now? Not now. When? Right there. No, not now. No, by the time you do it, I'm done. Right there. Okay.
Well, I love in one interview, you said that the moments with the puppets in the show were sort of like musical numbers. And the show is it's kind of what I love about the show is it's not sort of just here's my stand-up special, you're just taping a stand-up special. It's that it's an actual show, and that the puppets are the show's musical numbers.
Yeah, that's what we had to think of them as, because they added to the show, but they weren't very much like a musical number, and where they fit in the show was pretty much where you would have a musical number if it was a musical. Yeah, and I just knew, mainly, the reason I hadn't done a one-man show on a theater stage before was that I knew that it couldn't be just a concert. It couldn't be just your act up there on stage, because that's not theatrical, and that's not what New York and Broadway theater people want to go and see. I mean, they'll go see a concert, but if you're saying I'm going to do a show, you better show them a show. Plus, you can just color with so many more crayons on a theatrical stage than anywhere else. You know, you can use those dark Crayolas. In a comedy club, oh my God, you got to have a laugh every 30 seconds.
Right.
A stage, they'll let you paint a darker picture, and they'll go with you because, you know, a waiter's not trying to get them to buy another drink. So you got their attention, and I just knew we had to have something different. And thank goodness for Murphy and Paul's vision. They saw it too.
And the Tony goes to Jay Johnson, the two and only.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to first personally thank the entire Broadway theater community because they have welcomed my show with such open arms and such a wonderful passion. It made me feel a part of it. And me being kind of a vaudevillian, it's nice to have that welcome. And I thank you all for this honor.
Well, the show won tons of awards, but it also, you know, as I mentioned before, won the Tony Award for Best Special Theatrical Event. Did you ever think that a Tony Award would be possible when you were putting the show together?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't even on my radar ever in my life. I mean, to win a Tony meant you had to be on Broadway doing a show 8 times a week that got notice and got, you know, there were a lot of things that in my fantasy at one point, I thought there might be an Emmy, you know, maybe an Emmy for some television work. That's possible, but never thought about a Tony. But we got such lovely reviews, like the minute we opened, and people got it, you know, they absolutely got it. And they kept saying, well, we're off Broadway now, but we need to go Broadway. And even getting to Broadway, it didn't dawn on me because I didn't think that there was a category that it wasn't going to be the best musical. It wasn't going to be the best play. And this category of the best special theatrical event, I didn't even know existed. And it exists for this particular show. It means this is a show that probably nobody else is ever going to do because it's so integral to the person doing it, that it is special and it's an event. But they want to acknowledge that it was special and it was the best that year. So, I couldn't be more proud of that work. Because it's an actor's award. It's a performer's award. Like I said, you don't get it for doing 2 minutes on a television show. You get it for doing 8 shows a week, constantly, every night. You don't know when the voters were there. You don't know when the Academy was there. You don't know that, okay, I have to be really good tonight because all the Academy people, no, you don't know. They come 2 or 3 at a time. So you have to do it. You have to be on your game and you have to do the show the best you can every time. And twice on Saturday and Sunday. So, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it because, like I say, it was the work.
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk a little bit about the art of ventriloquism. And I think when people think about ventriloquism, they focus on the ventriloquist not moving their lips. But also much, and I see this as a puppeteer, is the manipulation of the puppet to make the character seem alive. And I've seen some clips of you and Bob being interviewed on like morning shows to promote appearances. And the interviews will ask you a question, like a sort of a technical question about the show. And while you're answering, Bob is always alive. He's looking around. He's looking up at you. How important is that constant appearance of life to the character? Well, it is the essence of ventriloquism. Waylon Flowers, they used to say, Waylon Flowers, what a terrible ventriloquist. I mean, look, his lips. I mean, not even. Well, to me, I never thought of Waylon as a ventriloquist. He was maybe one of the best puppeteers, open stage puppeteers I've ever seen. And Madam was absolutely alive, but there was never a dialogue between Waylon and Madam. He was just there, sitting next to her, and pretty soon you forgot he was there. You concentrated on her. And I think a lot of people believe that ventriloquism is just that. It's a distraction, and if I can get you looking at the puppet, that's it. But it's not. It's 2 people that you maintain all the time. It's not a ping pong match where I'm alive now, and now the puppet's alive. Now I'm alive again, the puppet's dead. And I see that all the time. And so much concentration on trying to get your lip control that you forget the puppet is there. And boy, as a puppeteer, you know, if a puppet gets still for more than a second, they're dead. They're just
they're lifeless.
Right.
And you can't ever let that happen, because your job is to make the appearance of life. It's very important. And I think a lot of ventriloquists kind of look at it as a magic trick. My theory of magic and ventriloquism is maybe simplistic, but to me, it's the perfect analogy. You are amazed at a magic trick because you do not know how it works. You see a miracle because you don't see the trickery. You don't see where the switch was made. You don't see where the color was changed. You don't see that. Once you do understand that, you appreciate the manipulation, but you never have that awestruck, oh my God, how did that happen, ever again. Right. Ventriloquism is exactly the opposite. You walk on stage, and the minute you bring out a ventriloquist puppet, people say, oh, it's a ventriloquist act. This guy is going to make me believe that this puppet is talking, and he's going to be talking, and it's going to appear like that little puppet is talking as well. And in 3 minutes, you're amazed again. You are, if it's done right, you are blown away every time. Every time, you know how the trick is done. I tell you pretty much what we're going to do, and it still affects you in an emotional way, like the first time you see a magic trick. So it's not a trick; it's an art, and anything done well is an art. But if ventriloquism is done well, it two people that are real. I mean, one person and another person, and like you say, he has to be maintained all the time. There was one time, talk about a television show. There was one time on a morning show, and I don't remember what it was, but just being aware of your situation is very important to me. Aware of who you are and how you're talking and who's there and what's going on. I could see that there was a cameraman that was, it was a third camera, and he was dollying sort of past me and sort of coming around the back. And in my mind's eye, I said, the director's going for a shot of me with my hand and Bob's back. And usually I say, that's not a great shot. Don't take it. And always keep me in the shot. Don't ever take a single of Bob. And same thing with Bob and me. So it's always twos. So I saw it coming around, and I'm talking to the guy. But by the time the camera got around, Bob had turned his head totally around and was looking in the camera. And it broke. I heard them laughing in the control room. And it was as if I had no idea that Bob was doing it. Well, okay, that's part of the performance. But that was one of my favorite times, is they thought they had me, and Bob told them not to look at that.
When you're coming up with material for your characters, do you find it through sitting and writing, or is it improvisation through the character?
A little of both. Yeah. I think if you have a little roadmap that you've written out, you can always enhance it by just things that happen when you're treating it like a dialogue, And if your character is really strong and you know it really, really well, then it will write a lot of its own material because that character has a voice that's real to you. If you hear that voice, it comes with all of its background and all of its reasons and all of the things. I was told once that Mel Blanc, doing all the voices of all the Warner Brothers characters, that the only thing he needed to look at a picture of that character. So they would show him Daffy Duck, he's got it. They would show him Bugs Bunny, he's got it. But until he saw the picture, all those things weren't in place, all the history, all the stuff. And, I think that's ventriloquism. If you have your character strong enough and then you just say, hey, Bob, what's happening today? Well, if he answers like you would answer me if I ask you that question, then you're going to come up with something,
Yeah.
It's a fun process, actually. And like I say, if you don't love rehearsal, you might not like to perform.
Yeah. Do your characters ever surprise you with the things they say? Like you had no idea they were going to say that?
Yeah. They do it more than you would think, and more than I would ever hope for. But now there's two ways to look at that. You can say, well, I've hit schizophrenia. I now don't know what I'm doing. I'm hearing voices that I don't understand. That would be the neuroses. But every actor I've ever known, if he's done a part long enough, can ad-lib in that character. It just happens. And when a puppet says something that I didn't really think of, or that wasn't a joke I was going for, and it just happened, I don't think of that being insane. I think of that as just I've had that character long enough that it thinks before I have to filter. That side of my brain just says it without me saying, should I, would I, do I, am I involved in this? And so it's just part of the art, Yeah. And when it does happen, you kind of go, yeah, okay. It's not insanity. Thank goodness. They're not going to lock me up for it, so.
They're going to pay you to do it. It's amazing.
Yeah, hopefully they are. They'll pay me twice, one for me and Bob.
Yeah.
What? You want to play with me? You seem like a nice guy. Yeah, I'd like to play with you. What do you play out here? You want to play ball? Ball? Yeah. Is that where you throw the ball against the wall and then you hit it with a stick and you keep hitting it and throwing it around until you get tired? Yeah. I don't like that game. That's okay. It's good. We can do another one. Yeah. You want to play a ventriloquist game? Sure. What the heck? Wait. Does it involve hitting a ball in any way? No. Good.
I would love to ask about one of your other characters, Spaulding, because when you talk about simplicity, I'm not sure how much more simple you can get than a pair of sort of puppet peepers and a tennis ball. How did the idea for Spaulding come about?
Well, I don't remember the way to cut a tennis ball. I don't remember if I saw a tennis ball that was cut. I don't know if I saw somebody I really don't know. But I managed to get a tennis ball where this mouth would work. And then, of course, Hobie and his peepers are fantastic. So suddenly I went, this. But the original character I had in mind was a sock puppet. The mouth was held in the sock, and then the eyes were in the sock. So it looked very Muppet-like with a little thing there. Well, it comes time now to do the Broadway show, and there's not a good way for me to put my hand in a sock and get all ready. And logistically, it just wasn't working. So I think it was Paul that said, well, the sock is the problem. Putting on the sock is if you didn't have the sock, you could just grab the ball and you have your eyes. That's it. So Spaulding became Spaulding rather than some little character. And eventually he was rolled out on stage and he was, thrown from the audience. He was done all kinds of things. So, yeah, he was always kind of a subliminal character, but he really found his own in the Two and Only. And for him to appear like he does, and I think he's one of the highlights.
Well, I was super excited. I saw Spaulding, or one of the Spauldings, at Venhaven in Kentucky.
Oh, yeah. That's the one that was on stage, yeah.
Yeah, I know that you're a big supporter of Venhaven. Why do you think that place is so special?
Well, everyone thinks it's the puppets, and they have every puppet maker that ever was good enough to be, hired and bought, and famous puppets and famous puppeteers, and it's just an incredible resource. You don't see that many puppets in that genre anywhere else, because there's not a marionette, there's not a rod puppet. They're all puppets, and it keeps growing. But for me, the puppets are terrific and they're wonderful. And you go, wow, and you realize there's nothing new. You can think we came up with a new way to animate a mouth. No, you can find it. The 1700s, they did it that way. But I go in and I go right for the pictures because the puppet is wonderful, but I'm more interested in the person that chose that instrument to play. I want to see the trombone player, and they've got all the pictures of all the people and some that they have just the picture, not the puppet. But you see the puppet sitting there, and then you see the guy with him, and you go, wow, why would that guy, a big Italian-looking guy with a very European beard, choose to work with a leprechaun?
Right. Yeah.
And you go, what was that act, and what made it happen? There was one guy, Monsieur Brunard, who was Dick Bruno, I think, and he was from Brooklyn, and he took on, as the ventriloquist, took on this wonderful French accent. And his puppet had this Brooklyn accent that just was real authentic because that's the way he really talked. And people would say, oh, how did this Frenchman learn that accent? Well, it was, how did that Brooklynite learn that accent? That's how it was, but yeah, I just think it's important because all of us, all performers, all artists, stand on the shoulders of the people that have stood there before, and to see so many people with so many ideas doing so many things, and from big puppets to little puppets, complicated, simple. It's all there, and we get to kind of revel in it and be glad we're part of it.
Yeah.
You've been, haven't you, Grant? You've been to.
Yeah, two summers ago, I was on tour, and we just happened to be going through there, and it was sort of a little day trip. We went, and it was, I'm not a ventriloquist. I love it. I love watching ventriloquists, but I'm not. I'm just regular puppeteer. But it was so inspiring, and it was, like you said, it was just so amazing to see all this history and all the different styles of figures and everything like that. It was amazing.
It is amazing, and they're trying to up the. There's a big capital fundraiser now that they're trying to build better buildings that are a little more not economically, but environmentally friendly, and we're all helping them try to do that, because it's a collection is only a collection when it's kept together. People have said, oh, there's a couple of puppets in there that you could make a fortune if you sold those. Well, yeah, but then you wouldn't have a collection. You would have some individual guy having some great pieces, or girl, but it's really important. And one of my favorite stories of the museum is 4 figures, and his name was William Wood, was the ventriloquist. And the story goes that 4 puppets wash ashore in Galveston on the beach, and a little child finds them and says to her mommy, look at these dolls I found. And they went, well, they're not. So they take them to literally a doll hospital, right? And somebody says, no, these aren't dolls. These are ventriloquist puppets. In fact, they're professional ventriloquist puppets. They were all weathered, and they had washed ashore. They start backtracking. Okay, whose puppets were these? And they worked backwards to find out that William Wood had drowned, and the boat had capsized in the middle of Galveston, going in the Gulf of Mexico, going from one South American country to another. And the ship had gone down, and everybody had been lost. And the only thing that was left were these wooden puppets that eventually floated to shore to be found. So that's how they found out that he had lost his life.
Yeah, and well, it's funny that you mentioned this, because the one figure that really struck me when I was there was Alice, who is one of those figures.
Yep.
And
she's just ghostly, isn't she? She's just ghostly.
Yeah.
But I always thought that's a perfect script for a movie.
Yeah.
That's a Columbo. You work backwards from finding the dead bodies to who it was, and I find out that the story is even more intriguing than just washing ashore. There's a possibility that the boat didn't sink, that they actually robbed him and threw him and his daughter overboard and took the money and threw all his stuff off. So there's even more intrigue that it could have been murder, not just an accident. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we wouldn't, really, without Venhaven, we wouldn't know the story,
No, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's the repository. And the other wonderful thing about Venhaven, and I don't want to spend the whole time talking about them, but the repository of letters and memorabilia and playbills and all the things that is just as impressive, because W.S. Berger wrote every ventriloquist of any note of any time throughout his life, and he would write them and they would write him back. He would keep that letter and keep a carbon copy of the letter that he had sent them. So you can go back and research dialogue that people were having with W.S. Berger back a long time ago.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. It's a good place.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, I would love to know, who are some ventriloquists that are working today that you enjoy watching, that you enjoy checking out?
Oh, I love Nina Conte. I think Nina's terrific. And I love Terry stuff. I love Dan Horn. I love Taylor Mason. It's a shorter list to tell you who I don't like, and I don't want to even talk about that. But yeah, anybody that's doing it well, I just enjoy seeing them. And what Nina has done is just, that mask work that she did was unbelievable. And Dan is probably one of the best manipulators I've ever seen. And Taylor's just nuts. I like him. And yeah, and Darcy Lynn, of course, I think she's just cute as could be. And an interesting with Darcy now, she's Annette Funicello for ventriloquist. She won
Right.
when she was like 12. Now she's going through puberty and she's becoming this beautiful woman right before our very eyes. As we watch her puppets stay the same, she becomes this gorgeous lady. So it's going to be an interesting ride for her. Yeah. Just it's a great art form. I love puppets of any kind. My love for puppets kind of became ventriloquist puppets, but I was just sent a puppet by a friend of mine who made it. Just said I'd want to send me a tape of you opening it up, and it's a great little squirrel that my friend Gordon Smuter did.
Yeah, we've talked to Gordon on the show before.
Yeah. Well, he
Gordon's great.
sent me a surprise gift and didn't even tell me what it was. And it was terrific. I love Gordon. I've done a lot of stuff with Gordon in the past. He was very helpful in my corporate career. He would make imposter puppets for me. He would take a ventriloquist puppet and make it look like the executive that I was going to roast. And it was a huge success. We did, I don't know how many, maybe we did 75 of them, and then the guy gets to keep the puppet, and that's the greatest gift he'll ever get, of his own likeness. So,
Right.
Love Gordon. Great guy.
Well, Jay, as we finish here, I always like to ask, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Wow. The career itself is the highlight. I mean, who gets to do this? Who gets to be an artist? Who gets to make a living doing what you love? And you never work a day in your life. I would say as an event, standing on the Radio City Music Hall stage accepting a Tony is maybe as exciting as it could get,
Yeah.
And more exciting, it was handed to me by Eddie Izzard, one of my all-time heroes, handed me a Tony. But being able to work, just being able to, Soap was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Everything that I've been able to do, To and Only, was just, I would still be doing that show on stage right now tonight if they would still let us run, and other people didn't want our theater as well. But just life is a highlight, and I appreciate you asking me that, because it really is all the moments of your life put together make a great time.
Well, Jay, I really appreciate you coming on the show. If people would like to keep tabs on you online, do you have social media, that kind of stuff people can check out?
Yeah, I post mainly my artwork on Instagram, but it's Imaginate on Instagram. Website, thetwoandonly.com and monkeyjoke.com. And Facebook and all those things as well.
All right. Well, I will put links to all that in the show notes. And Jay, just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
Grant, you're a pleasure. It's nice talking to you today, and I hope you stay well and safe.
Thank you. You too. Many thanks to Jay Johnson for taking the time to chat with me for this episode. For links to Jay's work online, as well as to some of the other things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode number 48, over at underthepuppet.com. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 45's giveaway for a brand new set of 3 DVDs of Bert Tillstrom's Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, the first episodes. The question was, how many cats did Cheryl Blaylock say she had during the period of time she was flying out to Los Angeles for pilot season? The answer was 2. And the winner for this giveaway is Jared Ramirez. Congratulations, Jared. Your DVDs are on the way. Thank you to everyone who entered. Well, this episode we have another great giveaway for 2 DVDs featuring our guest, Jay Johnson. The first is a brand new DVD copy of his Tony Award-winning show, The Two and Only, and the other is a brand new 2-disc DVD set of the documentary I'm No Dummy, featuring Jay Johnson, Jeff Dunham, and several other ventriloquists. These DVDs can be yours if you can answer the following question from the episode you just listened to. What was the subject of the miniature installation that Jay Johnson's mentor, Art Sieving, was setting up on the day that Jay met him? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by July 15th, 2020, and the winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the August 1st, 2020 episode of the show. One entry per household. Good luck. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have a question, suggestion, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604 or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS or Android. You can also send questions via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram by searching for Under the Puppet. Well, that's going to do it for this time. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you next time right here on Under the Puppet. This episode of Under the Puppet featured music by Dan Ring and was edited by Steven Staver. Under the Puppet is a production of Saturday Morning Media and made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly pledge for as little as $1 a month. Patrons get new episodes before they are released, behind-the-scenes information, and exclusive bonus episodes. If you'd like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2020 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Pachoco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. The new Under the Puppet app is here for iOS and Android, and it is absolutely free. Download it today to get all the episodes of Under the Puppet in one place. Plus, you'll hear new episodes before their release, get exclusive bonus episodes, and more. Just search for Under the Puppet in the Apple App Store for iOS or on Google Play. You can also visit SaturdayMorningMedia.com/apps for direct links. The free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. Download it today. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.